And now we move on to our third and final part of Chapter 3, what is myth? And one of the first things that we can say is trying to distinguish between the victim as victim and the victim as monster. That it is not easy to directly assimilate mythology to the patterns of representations of persecution. But we can do that indirectly if we recognize what's going on in the monstrous. That both that which produces the monster and that which produces the text of persecution is the same thing. Girard calls it the single principle of distortion, and it's operative in both those texts, both texts of persecution and myths. The very desire that a increasingly scientific rationality produced, the desire for probability, led people to make accusations like poisoning the rivers, which sounds a little bit more possible, a little bit more believable than the evil eye or something like that. But that very desire also helps us to make the distinction between truth and falsehood, because then we see how desperate the person is to try and make it seem like this is what happened. The same operation goes on, but it is more daring in myth. That is, they're not looking to be probable. And that's why we have a tendency just to dismiss it. Oh, well, it can't be true. In history, guilt or the guilty remain distinct from their crime. But in myth, the person and the offense blend. Okay? It becomes an ontological tribute. So we see that's why they become monsters. If a person not only does something really awful, but is something really awful, then that person begins to become monstrous. And as Girard says, he produces disasters as easily as a fig tree produces figs. Now, is there the causal relationship between the crime and the crisis? Okay, and this is where Girard says the texts of persecution provide us with the Ariadne's thread for reading myths. Ariadne's thread is what led people through the labyrinth to get them out of it. We can use these texts of persecution in the same way to get out of the labyrinth of the myth. We can see the crimes not as crimes, but as accusations of crimes. I mean, think of the difference. We all say, the people who study this and talk about it, we talk about, well, Oedipus slept with his mother. Oedipus killed his father. He's a murderer. He's incestuous. And what if you suddenly say, no, maybe he didn't? This is what people accused him of. It doesn't mean that he actually did it. In the same way that the Jews did not poison the water, Oedipus did not sleep with his mother. Okay? And so our task, Girard tells us, our task is to use this decoding of text of persecution that we learn through the text of persecution that we have learned in our history. Not that it's a historical methodology, but that we human beings have learned in our history to do this. Now we can apply it further to gain access to mythology. The face of the victim shows through the mask in the text of persecution. This is what Girard says. Texts of persecution have these cracks in them. Okay? We don't believe in witches. And so when we read a text that accuses women, some old lady, of being a witch, we don't believe the accusation. And we see the victim. We feel that these women were picked upon and were persecuted. But when we turn to mythology, the mask is still intact. We don't see the victim behind it, and Girard is trying to get us to see that. We need to learn to read the distortions in myths the same way we have learned to read them in persecution in our own history. Now, one of the big differences that a lot of people are going to point to is the absence of the sacred in history, where it's very present in myth. Basically, by sacred, what Girard is referring to at first level is simply the gods, right? All these stories about the gods. We have these stories, very strange gods oftentimes, very immoral gods sometimes, but still gods, somehow superhuman beings that are present in all kinds of myths, and we don't find them in history. He says, well, then let's begin. Let's take a step back and see if there aren't traces of the sacred in text persecution. So what is belief in magic? Right? We don't believe in magic, but certainly Guillaume de Machaut did. Okay? Certainly the people that persecuted the witches did believe that there was some sort of power that these people had to affect events. Okay? So what Girard wants to point to is there is a social belief in magic that is a remnant, a trace of the sacred, okay, of something that's superhuman, of something that transcends our possibilities. The victim, and this is his conclusion, is a scapegoat. Okay, now when he says that, he says what we have to understand by this is the innocence of the victim. They're not guilty of what they're being accused of, and yet they are capable of polarizing everyone else in opposition to them. And the collective end result of that polarization is their death, that then leads to a new situation in which they are seen in a positive light. Okay? But let's slow down. Let's look at the logic of representation. Even if we do not participate in the persecution, we can get caught up in its logic through its representation. So let's say I'm not the person out there killing the Jews, but when people are telling me the Jews poison all the water, and that's why all these people are dying, if there's a social belief in magic, I can believe in that. I can believe these Jews are really guilty, and these people that are out there killing them are doing a really good thing. And in that way, we get imprisoned in the illusion of persecution. It becomes a full system of representation. Everybody believes it. Why is this so powerful even today? Because nobody recognizes their own scapegoats. I always have legitimate enemies. The people I don't like them because they really are bad. But I am more than willing to admit that there are scapegoats in the world. Just I don't do it. But there are scapegoats in the world. As a matter of fact, there are a lot of scapegoats. And I can find them for you. I could show you different places where people are scapegoated. I'm really good at it. And Girard is saying, okay, think about this. We all can recognize other people's scapegoats. But we are somehow trapped in an illusory world where we cannot see our own. This comes from a strong belief in the guilt of the victim. The victim polarizes all the suspicions, the tensions, the reprisals in the community. Everything that's going on between me and you, now it all gets directed at this person. And the community gets emptied. It really is a purging of all these poisons onto the victim. Okay? And in the myths, you often see this conjunction of a very guilty victim dying, a violent end, that also frees the community. Suddenly the community is at peace. The transgressor restores the order that he has somehow traversed. And for Girard, this exactly is what the primitive sacred is. The primitive sacred is violence. And it is a violence that controls violence. And in that sense, it's both beneficial and harmful. It's beneficial because it controls violence. It stops everybody from getting killed. It's harmful because it kills the victim. Persecutors really do get reconciled. This is the amazing thing about it. If we are all having all kinds of problems with each other and everything, and we can find someone that we all can agree to blame and to kick out, we will all feel better and we will all get along. Okay? This person becomes the single cause of all the good and the evil. Now, in primitive society, the main thing that happens is that then this person becomes the source of all blessings. When we suddenly are all reconciled and we wonder, why are we reconciled? We realize it was due to him, the victim. We wouldn't call him the victim, but due to him. It was a God that we killed.